It's April of 1953, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower just signed Executive Order 10450, barring any criminal, infamous, dishonest, immoral, or notoriously graced conduct, habitual use of intoxicants to excess, drug addiction, sexual perversion, from holding a government job, opening the door for the beginning of the Lavender Scare. The Lavender Scare was a mass firing of homosexual Americans as they were suspected to be security breaches. Although the Stonewall riots are often considered the beginning of the gay rights movement, the firing of Frank Kameny in 1957 from his federal position at the Army Map Services for being a homosexual arguably marked the start of the fight for equal rights. The Supreme Court case that came when Kameny appealed his dismissal forced gay rights activists to grapple with balancing social responsibilities and civil rights. The main reason gay and lesbian people were fired was that Joseph McCarthy claimed that homosexuals would reveal government secrets since they could be blackmailed easily due to the inherent secrecy of being a homosexual. Homosexuality was heavily looked down upon, and it was likely that you would be outcast by society and even your family if you came out as a homosexual. An estimated 7,000 to 10,000 people were fired during the Lavender Scare, and most of them went quietly as so not to draw attention to themselves and their homosexuality. Unlike other victims of the Lavender Scare, Kameny didn't go quietly. While firing someone based on who they love seems crazy to us nowadays, it wasn't that straightforward back then. In fact, many organizations and government agencies publicly disapproved of the employment of homosexual people. For example, the American Civil Liberties Union released a statement saying homosexuality is a valid consideration in evaluating the security risk factors in sensitive positions. Kameny appealed his firing to the Court of Appeals, and they refused to hear him out. He then reevaluated his argument and submitted it to the Court of Appeals again. In 1960, Kameny argued to the Court of Appeals that they should rehear his case because his firing was based solely on a suspicion that he was a homosexual, not actual evidence. Kameny had a federally guaranteed right to be free from discrimination, which, he submits, is no less illegal than discrimination based on religious or racial grounds. The First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees freedom of religion to all citizens, and the Civil Service Commission clearly breached the First Amendment during the Lavender Scare when it fired employees for immoral conduct. Kameny said in an interview in 1989, the government then put its disqualification of gays under the rubric of immoral conduct. The word simply does not belong in any issuance in this country. Morality is a matter of personal opinion and individual belief on which any American citizen may hold any view he wishes and upon which the government has no power or authority to have any view at all. More than that, then having stated a general principle, you have to apply it very specifically and pointedly to the case at hand, and that was that. In my view, homosexuality is not only not immoral, but is affirmatively moral. In his writ for certiorari, he used the government's reasoning that gay people are inherently immoral and will be blackmailed because they are secretive about their sexuality, and flipped it. That was the main argument of Kameny's writ for certiorari in 1961. He thought the argument that gay people are intrinsically immoral was arbitrary and figured the best way to make the government realize it was to make an arbitrary argument as well. His arbitrary argument was that being gay is inherently moral and it is a moral good. His second argument was that he couldn't be blackmailed if the entire world already knew he was gay. After being fired from his job at the U.S. Army Map Service, Frank Kameny was impoverished and did not have access to the social right of food. While the social rights of food are not protected by law in the United States, nor has it ever been, it is a part of the social responsibilities of the community around us to support us, no matter our differences. As Frank Kameny said in an interview in 1989,
the next 2 or 3 years were extremely difficult. In fact, by the time I got into 1959, I was living for about 8 months on 20 cents worth of food a day, which even by 1959 prices was not terribly much. It was a great day when I could afford 5 cents more and put a pat of butter on my mashed potato.
While Frank Kameny and the rest of the Mattachine Society of Washington were determined to change the minds and laws of the United States, they also had to comply with the laws of the time. It was illegal to do activities such as kissing, dancing, and holding hands with people of the same sex, and gatherings of gay people were often raided by the police. The names, addresses, and occupations of those arrested for being gay would be posted in the newspaper. Frank Kameny was an active member of the gay rights community, and he was good at completing his social responsibilities, one of them being helping getting dancing legalized in gay bars. After a police raid of a large house rented by a group of homosexuals, Kameny met with Roy Blick, the chief of the Washington Vice Squad. Kameny said the raids were perfectly illegal and a waste of police resources. He also argued that, like a lot of laws regarding homosexuality and grounds for dismissal from the military and government jobs, the chief's answer was too vague. After Kameny told Chief Blick that his answer was too vague, Chief Blick narrowed down the answer to the indecent part of men dancing with other men as people groping each other. With that in hand, Kameny set out to fulfill his social responsibility by fighting for dancing in gay bars. An argument Kameny and his attorney, Brian N. Scott, made in their court cases was that we assert flatly and without compromise that homosexuality, but whether by act or by mere inclination, is not immoral, and, in fact, that it can be cogently argued that for those so inclined, it is moral in a positive sense. While at first, Kameny had refused to take a different job out of principle, he was nearing starvation. So, the National Employment Service took pity on him in 1959 and hired him for a temporary position. After only 6 weeks of working there, the National Employment Service no longer needed him. At this point, Kameny decided to interview for new positions. After many rejections, Kameny concluded that their security offices refused to authorize the hiring as they assumed the Department of Defense wouldn't provide him with a security clearance. Kameny had officially become unhireable. In 1961, Kameny wrote a letter to President Kennedy to bring the problem of discrimination against homosexuals to his attention with a new perspective. In World War II, I willingly fought the Germans with bullets in order to preserve and secure my rights, freedoms, and liberties, and those of my fellow citizens. In 1961, it has, ironically, become necessary for me to fight my own government with words in order to achieve some of the very same rights, freedoms, and liberties for which I placed my life in jeopardy in 1945. Frank Kameny inspired significant change both in the short and long term. In 1961, Kameny ran for the first non-voting congressional delegate position. He utilized the legally mandated time on live television to raise awareness of gay rights issues, which, in turn, had many lasting effects and, I believe, began to foster a more positive environment where homosexuality could be discussed openly and destigmatized. This transformation didn't occur overnight, but seeing issues addressed on television made them appear more socially acceptable. In 1971, he persuaded the American Psychiatric Association to cease classifying homosexuality as a mental illness after the Mattachine Society of Washington interrupted their meeting. He organized multiple peaceful protests outside of the White House with the term "gay is good." It was created to show that the gay community deserves the same rights as anyone else. It was drawn from the Black Civil Rights Movement, and more specifically, the term "Black is beautiful." A longer-term effect Frank Kameny had was when same-sex marriage was legalized in 2015. Kameny participated in a debate on the topic of same-sex marriage in 1974, which might have ultimately been used in the final decision. Another long-term effect Frank Kameny had was in 2010 with the repealing of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Act that made it illegal for openly gay people to serve in the military. After fighting all his life for a bill just like this one, Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act was signed on June 15th of 2020 and made it unlawful for employers to discriminate on the basis of sexuality or transgenderism. In 2009, the predecessor to the Civil Service Commission issued a formal apology to Frank Kameny. It took him just over 50 years, but in the end, Dr. Franklin E. Kameny won his case.